Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to this April webinar organised by the Highland branch of the Royal Aeronautical Society, your inclusive home for everyone with an interest in aerospace in the Highlands and Islands. I'm Dave Higgins, one of the members of the branch committee, and I'd like to offer a special personal welcome to anyone who's joining us tonight for the first time. Since we started this online webinar series in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have taken you from the tip of the Scottish mainland, where we got an up-to-the-minute update on progress on our local spaceport with Space Hub Sutherland, down to Inverness Airport and our local search and rescue helicopter service, as well as looking at the history behind one of the pioneers of aviation in the Highlands, when we looked at the life of Captain E.E. Fressum. But it will be a very different type of captain who will be speaking to us tonight as we return to the hub of military aerospace in the Highlands at Royal Air Force Lossiemouth. Since taking over command of Royal Air Force Lossiemouth about 2 years ago, Group Captain Chris Layden has overseen a period of huge growth, including the expansion of the Typhoon Force, the introduction of a new aircraft type at Lossiemouth in the P-8 Poseidon, and major infrastructure works that have so far seen the runway renewed and the commencement of a complete overhaul of both the technical and domestic accommodation at the site. All of this while maintaining a quick reaction alert commitment 24/7 and delivering on ever more operations both at home and abroad, not least in the light of current world events. We're honoured to have him join us tonight to share his reflections on his time in command and to take part in a question and answer session following that. If you think of a question that you'd like me to read out to Group Captain Layden during his talk, please type it into the comments as soon as you think of it, and I will read it out for him to respond. If your camera and mic are live and you'd rather ask him a question personally, please electronically put your hand up using the hand button, and I will ask you to ask your question personally in order. If you have any further questions about the format of the Q&A, please feel free to type them into the chat while the group captain is delivering his presentation. But I think I've said enough. Ladies and gentlemen, I hand you over to Group Captain Chris Layden.
Hello, folks. Higgy, thanks very much for that kind introduction. Give me a thumbs up if I'm coming through okay. Fantastic, good. Hey, well, do you know what? It's a privilege and a pleasure for me to be able to spend the evening chatting to some like-minded souls with an interest in flying. And 2 days ago marked my 2nd anniversary in command of RAF Lossiemouth. But actually, this forum has got a really broad bank of experience in and with aviation. So I'm really looking forward to an interesting chat this evening. What I'll do, if I may, is just offer a few perspectives. First of all, just an orientation of what I think Lossiemouth is about at the moment. And then second, just a few more general reflections on my experience as the bloke who's privileged to run the show for a couple of years. And then we'll just go anywhere you like in Q&A. So with that, on to just an idea of how I see RAF Lossiemouth at the moment. Great, Nick, if you could bring up the title slide. Okay, and on one, if you please. Thank you. So what's Lossiemouth about? We've got our mission statement is quick reaction alert, maritime patrol, and global operations. And given Lossiemouth's strategic location, and given the investment the Air Force has made in RAF Lossiemouth as a station, there's an awful lot of eggs in this basket, and actually it's become really prominent as one of the most critical combat air and maritime main operating bases in the service. But first of all, let's take a moment to look at where we've come from. Next, please, Nick. Brilliant. So, as many of you probably already know, RAF Lossiemouth was requisitioned and built in 1939 as a training base out of range of German bombers. But as we went through the war, it quite rapidly became apparent that this location had some advantages. So starting as a training base, the emblem of RAF Lossiemouth, which is a snowy owl perched on crossed claymores, symbolising the wisdom of flying instruction, but the sword symbolising the military element. Nonetheless, from a training base, it became quite quickly apparent that that our location allowed us to reach places which were hard to get to. And of course, the Tirpitz raid was launched from Lossiemouth because that was as far north as you could get from mainland UK with heavy bombers. And then at the end of World War II, we handed the station to the Navy. And from about 46 to 1972, it was a Royal Naval Air Station, HMS Fulmer, training generations of Fleet Air Arm pilots to operate fast jets and land them on carriers. Our satellite airfield, Milltown, a few miles to the east, was actually painted with a carrier deck, and the sheltered waters of the Murray Firth were perfect for carriers to operate and conduct flying training operations. So for many years, we were a Royal Naval Air Station. And one of my most illustrious predecessors as station commander was Captain Eric Winkle Brown, who is one of my aviation heroes and arguably the greatest test pilot who's ever lived. 1972, the RAF returns, and from that period until the late 80s, and that period was my first acquaintance with RAF Lossiemouth, the station operated a really rich variety of types. When I first saw Lossiemouth, it was operating Hunters, Buccaneers, Jaguars, Shackletons, and seeking search and rescue helicopters. And its next reinvention was as a tornado bomber station, with several squadrons of tornadoes, plus the operational conversion unit to train new crews. And for about 20 years, Lossiemouth's mission was to generate forces to do operations abroad using the tornado aircraft. The next reinvention came around about 2014 when Lossiemouth was selected as the second Typhoon main operating base, taking over from Lukers, which reverted to the status just of a diversion airfield and became Lukers Station. And the culture change there was going from a long-established strike attack station generating forces for operations abroad to a multi-role fighter station with responsibility for air defence in the UK. Thereafter, we reinvented ourselves again, and we're in the thick of that transformation as not just a combat air, but a maritime station. And the next stage is going to be the acceptance of the E7 Wedgetail aeroplane in about 2024, which replaces the E3 Sentry. And so airborne early warning is coming back to Lossiemouth with 8th Squadron, picking up where they left in 1994 when the Shackleton retired. And of course, the Wedgetail is much more than an airborne early warning aircraft, but we can go there later if you like. So we've got a rich history here, a very operational history, and a history which has involved several professional and cultural reinventions of ourselves, and that's what keeps it interesting. Okay, but what do we do now? On one, if you please, Nick. The first duty of the Royal Air Force is to secure the skies above the UK, and in the modern age, that's done with quick reaction alert. We have 2 quick reaction alert stations. Coningsby in Lincolnshire covers the south, and Lossiemouth covers the north. There are 2 sides to the quick reaction alert and Homeland Air Defence coin. The first one is counter-terrorism, which sees us prepared 24/7, 365 to react to any form of threat from the air. And of course, in the years following the 9/11 attacks, part of that game has involved being able to react very quickly and sometimes decisively to the threat of an airliner being used as a weapon of mass destruction. The fighters are at Lossiemouth, but it is a very broad team of teams, not just extending to the ground crew and operations staff who generate the capability here, but also to the sensor and command and control network that exists throughout the UK. And that is one of the more critical missions we deliver. On to the next one. The other angle is something we've been doing since the Cold War started, and that's air policing on behalf of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Every NATO nation in some way facilitates air defense of NATO's airspace, and as you can see from the map, the UK's area of responsibility is pretty extensive. It goes further north than the distance from Land's End to John O'Groats, and is predominantly orientated towards the Russian threat. Coningsby, as a rule, because of their location, spend more time reacting to cover London, but the first port of call to intercept and shadow, accompany, manage Russian airplanes tends to be Lossiemouth. The Russians, in my interpretation, for the last 10 years or so, have put a degree of effort into long-range aviation. I think partly to demonstrate that they still can. And our mission is to make sure that every time they come and probe the UK's air policing area and area of interest, then we meet them promptly, demonstrate our readiness, demonstrate our resolve as a member of NATO to police the alliance's airspace, and create that rather interesting comparison between highly capable modern fighter aircraft and Russian long-range airplanes, which entered service when my father was at primary school. The NATO air policing task is one of the longest ones in the RAF's history, and it's still happening right here, right now. And as I said, 24/7, 365. Okay, next. The new dimension to Lossiemouth, of course, is maritime patrol and anti-submarine warfare. As a nation which has an independent nuclear deterrent, we take securing the seas in order to protect that nuclear deterrent very, very seriously. As a maritime nation which depends for its lifeblood on international trade, we take securing the seas and the sea routes around the UK very, very seriously. And after the really difficult decision to retire the Nimrod aircraft from service, which was taken in the Defence Review of 2010, it was always recognised that we needed to get back into the maritime aviation game, because there are some things you can only do with a maritime patrol aircraft. The North Atlantic is one of the best hiding places in the world, and yet the gateway to the North Atlantic is the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. So particularly for the Russian submarine fleet, the routes into the Atlantic have to go through that gap and through the shallow water there. In those shallow waters, there is a good chance of detecting Russian nuclear submarines, whereas if you let them out into the Atlantic, they are much harder to find. So the game of the maritime patrol aircraft is to pounce, and pounce quickly, because sometimes your detections of Russian submarines can be fleeting, and unless you can get an asset into the trail, as they call it, really promptly, then you risk losing them in the deep waters of the North Atlantic. And of course, whereas a frigate or destroyer, or even a helicopter, moves at 30 miles an hour at its fastest, or maybe 120 to 130, a Poseidon will move at about 500 miles an hour, and it will get a long way. If you base them in the north of Scotland, then they're a good hour or two's flying time closer to that critical battle space in the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. So the mission of the Poseidons primarily is to find and track Russian nuclear submarines in order to protect our nuclear deterrent submarine. In addition, however, the capabilities of the Poseidon are really impressive in terms of being able to secure the seas more broadly. The sensors on them, which are extremely well integrated, will allow you, for example, to work out exactly who is who and who is where. Every vessel in a water space the size of Wales in about 45 minutes, and that is an exceptionally impressive capability. The Poseidon, in fact, is the best aircraft in the world at what it does. What I'm proudest of, however, is that the Poseidon crews are the best in the world at what they do. We were lucky enough when the Nimrod retired to be able to retain a number of those Nimrod crews who have a priceless bank of experience, because anti-submarine warfare in particular, but maritime in general, is the kind of skill set that only the people who are the best in the game can actually hold on to, and it relies on incredibly deep and broad corporate memory. And so when the Nimrod retired, the Royal Air Force took a bit of a punt. The Air Force decided that it was unthinkable the UK would permanently do without a maritime patrol capability, and so they lent our Nimrod crews, a relatively large number of them, to Allied air forces and navies in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, in order to keep the flame alive. And I'm delighted to say that that when the Poseidon entered service, almost all of them came back to Murray to get back into the maritime patrol game for the Royal Air Force. And as the new generation join, and we've got many of them at Lossiemouth now, that former generation, who we describe as the seed corn generation, have been able to pass the torch to them and pass on that priceless corporate knowledge, without which, frankly, it would have been almost impossible to regenerate our maritime capability. I confess to being a little bit of an anti-submarine warfare and maritime patrol geek. I find what they do fascinating, and as I tell them quite often, having grown up as a fighter pilot, the level of technical sophistication and refinement that that sits in the maritime patrol enterprise actually makes much of what I do as a fighter pilot look pretty primitive. Okay, next. So if you look at those two enduring, fundamental and nationally vital operations of securing the skies and securing the seas, the other thing that RAF Lossiemouth does is project air power worldwide. For the last 7-ish years, maybe a little bit more now, the last 7 or so years, we have been maintaining a presence in Cyprus in order to fly missions over Iraq and Syria. The UK was front and center in the military defeat of Daesh, the so-called Islamic State. And of course, that insurgency, although militarily defeated, still exists as kind of embers in some of the harder to reach areas of Iraq and Syria. And so the Operation Shader missions continue to be flown on a really regular basis out of Cyprus into the Levant. And as that conflict evolves, the mission evolves slightly as well. But I think the best way to describe it now is about delivering security in the region so that the people of Iraq and Syria have the freedom to choose their own future. And my goodness, when you consider what they've been through over the last 7+ years, they've really earned it. And so I view our contribution to that as a really noble endeavor. Okay, next. The other thing we do regularly is NATO air policing. There are a number of NATO nations, particularly the smaller ones, which either have relatively small air forces or no air forces at all. The Baltic states are a case in point. They have some really impressive niche capabilities like special forces and mine warfare, but they don't. Certainly, the Baltic states don't really have air forces, not with a combat capability anyway. And so the other NATO nations take it in turns to provide air policing and air security for them. The UK is theoretically on the hook with the alliance to do that, do a detachment of that rotationally every couple of years, but the UK chooses to do it every year, and both last year and the year before, those missions were mounted from RAF Lossiemouth. So we deployed squadrons to Romania, and the year before to Estonia, in order to provide air security for those NATO partners in the Baltic region. And of course, the Baltic region includes the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, and our mission there, as part of NATO, has been to make sure that the Baltic doesn't become a Russian lake, frankly. And so, as Russian aircraft transit the Baltic, which is NATO's backyard more than it is Russia's, NATO fighters and British ones, when it's our turn, will launch, intercept them, and make sure that we're able to manage them in their transits from principally Russia, mainland Russia, to the Kaliningrad Oblast, as it's called. Okay, next. Before I go on to defence engagement, I've given you a sense already of the breadth and scale of the operations that happen from RAF Lossiemouth, but to give you an easy fact, for the last couple of years, RAF Lossiemouth has delivered all of the UK's, all of the Royal Air Force's maritime air operations, and LOSSIE, despite being one of 3 combat air, i.e. fighter, main operating bases, has actually delivered more than 50% of the RAF's combat air operations. But there's more to it than just combat operations, and actually, in a world where the UK needs to engage globally and engage militarily, um, the mission of armed forces is broader than just being ready to fight, because actually what you do and whom you do it with sends a message. And so, in addition to the operational activity we do, we choose our exercising and our engagement activities really carefully in order to send messages about whom we wish to train with, whom we wish to be friends with, whom we wish to be interoperable with, so that those who don't subscribe to our values and way of life, and those who wish us harm, get a really clear message about what we and our partners and allies can do and are prepared to do in order to secure our interests. And that goes further than just the aviation side, actually, because we've got a highly professional force protection wing of RAF regiment troops based at RAF Lossiemouth, number 5 wing. And in recent years, they've spent a lot of their time, for example, in Nigeria, training their Nigerian equivalents in order to try and make the UK's contribution to security in sub-Saharan Africa. So the defence engagement footprint includes everything we do short of live operations, and represents quite a significant slice of our activity. So that's the operational picture of RAF Lossiemouth. It's exceptionally busy. The pace of life is fast here, but as the station commander, I never have a problem motivating our troops, because what they do and the importance of what they do is so obviously at the heart of securing the UK and its interests, that it's really easy to make that connection between everybody's day at work and protecting the people of the UK and their interests worldwide. But what else about Lossiemouth? On one. The future at Lossie is really bright. The station is a boom town, and if you go back to 2008, when there was a question mark over whether Lossiemouth would remain open, and when the people of Murray and the leaders of all the main parties in Scotland actually marched to demonstrate in support of keeping Lossiemouth open, the question mark over the station's future has absolutely disappeared now. The Lossie development program is in full swing. It was designed to expand the station in order to be able to accept a 4th Typhoon Squadron, number 9, who are up and running, and the Poseidon capability. And it's now expanding yet again to accommodate the E7 Wedgetail aircraft. What that means is £500 million of investment over 5 years just in the infrastructure. A complete relaying of the airfield, a new air traffic control tower, a new fire station, a new squadron building for Typhoons, a massive new building to accommodate Poseidon at the cost of £130 million, built by a local company, I'm happy to say, and a workforce increase of 50% in our regular service people over about a 7-year period. So the future is really bright here, and when I talk to my fellow station commanders, the challenges I've got in terms of being able to keep the mission going whilst the place turns into a building site are challenges most of them would love to have. Okay, next. The other thing which is a challenge I quite like to have is our location. If you go back 10, 20 years, there were actually quite a number of significant RAF stations in Scotland. There was Leuchars, there was Kinloss, there was Lossiemouth, and a few others. But actually, as the Air Force has configured itself for the 2000s, the 2010s, now the 2020s, and as we configure ourselves into the way we need to look in 2040, we have closed a number of bases and invested heavily in RAF Lossiemouth instead. So as you can see from the map there, Lossiemouth is the only significant RAF station in Scotland now. On the other hand, it is a brilliant place to live and work. We've got white beaches literally on the doorstep. We've got mountains at our back. We live in a microclimate which actually has the most sun per year in the UK, and it's just a brilliant place to live. I spend my summer mornings quite often before work fishing off the Lossiemouth Harbour Pier, and there aren't many places where you can do that. So the location is brilliant. privately as a commanding officer, I also rather like the fact that I'm a good 500 miles from the next person who can keep an eye on me, and what that geographic separation brings at Lossiemouth is a real sense of community, and it also results in there being a number of people who come up here, love the place, and come back again and again. A lot of our people have been here for quite a long time, and even if they haven't been here a long time, they tend to be returning after several previous tours. Okay, next. That business, however, of having to grow your service population by 50% over about 7 years, and also that business of being quite a long way from the friends and family support networks of a number of our English aviators, means that we need to be really quite proactive in selling what Lossie has to offer. The good news is the place sells itself to a significant degree. I think it's important not to shy away from the fact that the military life involves moving and often involves serving far from home. We have quite a lot of young people here, and I have to manage that quite carefully, because for an 18-year-old joining the military and being posted to serve hundreds of miles from friends and family is quite an undertaking. But on the other hand, the fact that the pace of life and the operational tempo makes it really exciting, and the fact that the location is so nice, means that actually Lossiemouth sells itself as a place to work. However, we don't leave it to chance. We make sure quite proactively that we get out about in the Air Force to let people know what we've got up here, because given that the Air Force is demographically mostly an English organisation, just because the population of England is almost 10 times the size of Scotland, and given that most people, therefore, who come who'd contemplate serving here actually have families down in England, it's right and proper that we invest some effort in actually letting them know what life is like up here. And as you can see from the pictures, in terms of the local area, the opportunities, both in your free time and professionally, it's a great place to serve. Okay. The other thing which we're really fortunate in is our really close integration with the local community. I was totting up the other day, and in about 30 years in the Air Force, I've served at 12 different bases. I have never come across one of them which has such close links and such loyal support from its local community. The people of Murray regard RAF Lossiemouth as their station. That was evident from 2008 when they marched to keep the place open, and the support we get from the local community and the local authorities is absolutely incredible. We're really closely integrated. If you compare the Air Force to the Army and the Navy, because of the sort of service we are, we tend to have people serving for much longer. The average length of service in the Air Force is about 16 years compared to about 7 for the Army. But also people in the Air Force, and it particularly goes here at Lossiemouth, tend to leave the service on really good terms and settle and integrate really well into the local community. There isn't a single school in Murray which doesn't have military children in it. The majority of those are from RAF Lossiemouth, and significant numbers of our partners work in healthcare, in education, in the high-tech sector, and in the professions around Murray. So the social and economic integration of Lossiemouth into the community in Murray is exceptionally close, and it's one of the reasons why this place enjoys such a great relationship with its local people. Okay, next. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. You'll be glad to hear. I'll just offer a couple of more general reflections, if I may, in terms of what my experience here has been like, and what I think flying in the Air Force looks like right now, and what being a station commander has been and is like. The first one is how flying is changing in the Air Force, particularly in the fighter forces, and what I'm seeing there is, compared to when I started. What I'm seeing is that the pilots who fly here now on the Typhoons and the air crews who fly in the Poseidons are probably more capable and professional than I was when I was just starting. They are really mature, well-educated, and capable folks. particularly in the fighter force, because of issues with backlogs in training and so on after the 2010 Strategic Defence Review. The demographic of your average first tourist fighter pilot is a lot more grown up than it was. At the moment, we don't tend to see your kind of 22-year-old flying officer first tourist on a fighter squadron. Most of these girls and boys are actually in their late 20s, some of them in their early 30s, and they are married quite often. Many of them have children, and they have more life experience, and in some ways are more serious about what they do than arguably I was when I hit my first frontline squadron at 25. I'm pleased to say they still have a pretty lively sense of fun, which keeps life interesting. The other thing is that I think there's more responsibility placed on them. As we become a smaller but more capable Air Force, the importance of each mission and each asset is probably proportionately greater than it was when I joined. We only have 9 Poseidons. The capabilities of the Poseidon make it a potentially battle-winning asset, even just one of them on task. And so the people entrusted with operating those airplanes carry arguably a more significant responsibility than I did when I first started. And if you look at the average Typhoon pilot now, I'll give you a sense. When I first started flying fighters, I flew Tornado F3s, and I had to master 3 weapon systems: a long-range missile, a short-range missile, and a gun. When I started on the Typhoon, I had to master 4 weapon systems, or 3 becoming 4: a long-range missile, a short-range missile, a gun, and a guided bomb. The average Typhoon pilot now has to master not just the air-to-air role in all its varieties, but also the air-to-surface role, and to an extent the reconnaissance role. They employ cruise missiles, guided bombs, a cannon, short-range air-to-surface missiles, 2 different types of long-range air-to-air missile, and 1 type of short-range air-to-air missile. And the mission sets they're called upon to be competent in day to day are much broader than the ones I had. So I'm really impressed with my people. The other thing which I think has changed with aviation recently, at least in the military context, is the reliance on simulation. As simulator technology gets better and better, as military flying becomes more and more expensive, and also, most importantly, as the tactics and techniques you use become observable more easily by other people, it gets more and more important to actually do your training in a simulator, either away from prying eyes or in a situation where you can actually control all the variables from weather to time of day to scenario. Because I can have my Typhoon pilots in the simulators here train as a 4-ship, all linked together in their cockpits over any country in the world, working any scenario in the world to prepare them for a potential mission in a way that just wasn't possible when I first joined. It is a lot more cost effective, and for example, when I started flying 20 plus years ago, you'd go in the simulator once a month to practice emergencies, and that was as good as the kit we had could do. Whereas nowadays you can practice almost the full range of mission sets in a simulator. You will never be able to replace the some of the unique challenges of actually flying properly in the live environment, as we call it. You can't build a simulator yet that does G. You can't build a simulator that really accurately replicates the risk, rigor, adrenaline, complexity, and friction of real flying with other real airplanes. But there's an awful lot you can do in the sim to hone your skills and drills that you can't do in the live environment. And equally in the Poseidon, the simulators are so good there that that you can take a pilot all the way up to what would be their first solo purely in the simulator, and by the time they actually fly the real aircraft for the first time, they're already competent pilots. And likewise, the rear crew, who have a simulator that links to the flight deck simulator, can practice everything up to, frankly, World War III in the virtual environment rather than the live aircraft. And when you're talking about tracking submarines, there just ain't that many submarines out there in the world. So the ability to actually create a really accurate computer model of a submarine and allow them to train against it in the simulator allows us to prepare our people better than they ever have been before. So in broad terms, when I first flew, I would probably do 15 to 20 hours a month in the airplane and maybe 1 hour a month in the simulator. Nowadays, people will probably do 10 in the aeroplane and anything between another 5 and 10 in the simulator, and that is enough to keep their skills up to par. Okay, those are my thoughts on what's changed in terms of military flying recently. The next thing I think that has been really prominent for me in this particular job is the business of risk, regulation, and policy. We operate in a relatively constrained environment. We need to deliver value for money, and military air crews will always want to be as good as they can possibly be. And they will want to train hard, and they will want to train with a degree of risk. At the same time, we live in a more regulated environment than I have ever flown in, and quite rightly, we need to keep our people safe. And although military flying is not an inherently safe business, it's absolutely incumbent on me to make sure that the risks I expose people to are valid. In other words, there's a good reason for doing it. As a personal reflection, in a heavily regulated environment, the way I earn my daily bread, and frankly, the way I deliver progress and value, is by taking risk, because you can regulate yourself out of business really easily. And if you try and drive risk out of your business, or even one part of your business, you either stop flying entirely, or, as I see happening quite a lot, in an attempt to eliminate the risk from one area, you simply increase risk in other areas. So I think one of the essential qualities in modern military flying, and particularly modern military flying leadership, is the ability to recognize where the real risks are, recognize how regulation and policy actually applies to what you're doing, and be sensible in the risks you take. Because if you don't take a bit of risk, and you try and insulate everything from risk, then you just create it elsewhere. And if, for example, I try and drive risk out of people operating around explosives, then suddenly they lose the ability to do that kind of thing, and that could come home to roost on day one of the war. So a surprising amount of my work for the last 2 years has simply involved working out where to take risk in a sensible fashion in order to open doors for my people to get out and do their business. Cultures and integration. You might have seen on maybe the second slide my vision alongside the mission, which was one team delivering together safely. The one team bit of it, I think, is one of the most important things that you do as a station commander. We've got a really broad enterprise at Lossiemouth. There's about 3,500 of us working here, and we are all highly trained professionals and specialists in our fields. Our jobs are pretty demanding and complex, and it's very easy to keep your head down and just focus on your bit of it. But I remember vividly the experience of deploying for the Libya operation, and we arrived in southern Italy at a base we hadn't prepared for, relatively late in the day. The ground crew joined us when we'd landed our jets in the middle of the night on the back of a Hercules, and we flew the first mission the next morning. I'll expand on that later if you like. But the thing that made us able to get on and do the mission was that when we all found ourselves in a relatively unfamiliar environment with a lack of clarity on our tasking, and a bunch of stuff that hadn't really been done yet, like rules of engagement, for example, what allowed us to cope and succeed was that we knew each other and we trusted each other. And that is about making sure that you respect and nurture the cultures that exist in the various professions and specializations, but you also encourage people to get to know each other so that they can trust and understand each other, and they realize what they need from each other, and they get used to operating together. Because I'm pretty convinced that the effectiveness of any operational unit rests not as much on the capability of the kit and how well they're trained, but actually on the bonds of trust and understanding between the members of the team. So one of my journeys as I've had the privilege to be in command of Lossiemouth has actually been bringing maritime patrol into the culture of the station, shifting its focus from just focusing on fighters, quick reaction alert, and so on, educating people about how important it is to secure the seas around the UK, and teaching them about how good the Maritime Force are at doing their business. And this concept of Team Lossie, which I have championed since I took command, is probably the most powerful element of the culture that we've got on the station at the moment. And it's probably what allows us to support each other and therefore deliver the mission. Finally, what makes it fun? I've been in the Air Force about 30 years now. This is without a doubt the most enjoyable job I've ever had. It is exceptionally varied and exciting. The great thing about being the station commander is you can go anywhere and people have to pretend to be pleased to see you. And so one day I will be in the cookhouse watching chefs smoke 30 breasts of duck for canapes. The next day, the next hour even, I'll be standing on top of an 800,000 litre bulk fuel tank under a grassy mound on the station, listening to a deep expert talking about how they pipe millions of litres of fuel around the station to keep it in good condition and make it available to the airplanes. And then that afternoon, I might be dealing with compassionate issues and looking after people. And then that evening, I might be flying a Typhoon or flying in a Poseidon over the North Atlantic. The sheer variety of the job is one of the most enjoyable things about it. But what trumps all of that, frankly, is the amount of time I get to spend engaging with people. There aren't that many organizations out there which have such a talented team of volunteers as the Royal Air Force. And on a frontline base with a clear and nationally vital mission, the energy that you see in your people and the energy, frankly, I get from our people is what makes me tick and makes this a really fun job to do. Flying. I fly. As a station commander, I fly. I'm not qualified on the Poseidon, but I fly in the aircraft with the team as often as I can. I don't do it as much as I'd like to, but I probably fly with Team Poseidon about every 2 months. When I took command, I set myself the aspiration of flying in the Poseidon once a month and flying the Typhoon once a week. I probably managed Poseidon once every 2 months and Typhoon about once every 2 weeks. I was lucky enough to go flying today, which is why I'm dressed like this. And why do I do it? I do my share of quick reaction alert because I think if I'm taking flying hours, then I need to make sure I pull my weight in that respect. But actually, as the commander with a legal responsibility for the safety of flight for the teams here, it's just vital to stay connected. And I could try and do it at arm's length, and I could try relying on my experts, and I trust them, and they're really good. But there is simply no substitute for actually flying the airplane and experiencing what the ground crew and the support teams and the pilots themselves experience as they go through the mission cycle. It's also bloody good fun, and frankly, if you could, why wouldn't you? But I genuinely think that that the ability to fly as a station commander, and particularly one with some legal responsibilities for safety, is pretty much vital. It's also brilliant because so far they haven't invented a fighter aircraft where you can get emails in the cockpit. So as I said, I think this is one of the most, well, it's absolutely the most fun job I've ever done. It's pretty fast paced at times, but if you look at the sheer breadth of the enterprise, the human richness of trying to look after 3,500 people, and the professional interest of the mission we do, I am pretty sure that I will never have anything quite so much fun to do in the rest of my RAF career wherever I go. So on that note, which I hope is a high, I will stop talking at you and sit back and chat about anything anybody wants to talk about. Thank you very much.
Well, sir, thank you very much for your overview of the history of the base and its place in the world, the mission of its planes and its people, but also those particularly those personal insights at the end in what it's looked like to you as the person in the chair and the way you've gone about your business. As we